You ever hear someone say your heart is only as healthy as what you eat? Well, it turns out that might be one of the most scientifically accurate statements around. Because when you look at the data, decades of it across continents, cultures, and dietary patterns, you start to see a stunningly clear picture emerge. The foods we choose every single day, what we put on our plates meal after meal, can either help protect the arteries that keep us alive or quietly injure them, setting the stage for the #1 killer of men and women worldwide. And what's most remarkable is that every bite counts, not in a vague, motivational sense, but in very real, measurable, biological ways that we can actually observe under a microscope. Your body is constantly listening to your diet, responding, adapting, healing, and sometimes, if given the chance, reversing damage that doctors once believed was permanent. I'm Dr. Michael Greger, and today we're diving deep into the scientific landscape of what truly constitutes the best foods for a healthy heart. Not opinion, not trends, not the latest influencer's top 10 superfoods list. We're talking about what the peer-reviewed science shows: hard endpoints, cardiovascular events, atherosclerotic plaque, blood flow, inflammation, endothelial function, and what foods, sometimes surprisingly humble foods, can help keep your arteries open and your heart beating strong for decades to come. Because heart disease doesn't just happen, it's not a lightning bolt. It's more like a slow drip of microscopic injuries to the inside lining of our blood vessels, called the endothelium, and those injuries accumulate, not over days or weeks, but years. The good news? Just as diet can fuel the damage, diet can also help stop it, and in some cases even reverse it. That's why understanding the most powerful foods for heart health isn't optional, it's life-saving. Now, most people hear the phrase heart-healthy foods and think of vague concepts like whole grains, lean protein, or healthy fats. But I want to bring the science alive, show you what the evidence actually says about specific foods, food groups, and dietary patterns that consistently show up in the literature as being protective against heart disease. And as always, we'll ground everything in randomized controlled trials, population studies, mechanistic research, and interventional data. So let's start with the vascular system itself, the nearly 60,000 miles of blood vessels coursing through your body. If you stretched every capillary, artery, and vein end to end, they could wrap around the Earth more than twice. And that entire network has a single, fragile, one-cell-thick lining called the endothelial layer. That's the barrier between your bloodstream and the rest of your body. If that lining gets inflamed, oxidative stress increases. If it becomes stiff, blood pressure goes up. If it becomes dysfunctional, cholesterol can more easily penetrate the arterial wall, bind with oxidized molecules, and kickstart the plaque-building process. So the real root of cardiovascular disease starts with how well that endothelial layer is functioning. And incredibly, we can measure how well it works using something called flow-mediated dilation, or FMD. And here's where diet enters the picture. Studies show that within hours of eating certain foods, FMD improves. Within hours, meaning your arteries can actually relax and widen more effectively, improving blood flow. And other foods, well, they do the opposite. This is why it's critical that we approach heart disease not as a static condition, but as a dynamic, hourly process influenced by our dietary patterns. Let's talk about one of the most powerful categories of foods for supporting endothelial function and reducing cardiovascular risk: berries. Yes, berries. Raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, blueberries. These antioxidant-rich, fiber-packed little spheres of nutritional excellence consistently show up in the literature. In randomized controlled trials, consuming berries improved biomarkers associated with heart disease, things like LDL oxidation, arterial stiffness, and inflammatory markers. Blueberries in particular seem to shine. One study showed significant improvements in endothelial function after just 6 weeks of daily blueberry consumption. Another study found that eating strawberries for a month lowered LDL cholesterol and reduced oxidative stress. What's going on here? Berries are packed with anthocyanins, those deep red, purple, and blue pigments that act like tiny molecular shields against free radical damage. They help calm inflammation, reduce oxidative stress, and even modulate gene expression related to cardiovascular health. And all this for under 100 calories a cup. If berries came in pill form, they'd be a top-selling cardiovascular supplement. But we don't need a supplement. Nature already packaged them perfectly. Another food group with extraordinary cardiovascular benefits, leafy greens. We're talking spinach, kale, arugula, Swiss chard, collards, beet greens, foods so nutrient-dense that they provide more vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants per calorie than almost anything else you can eat. But what makes leafy greens especially powerful for your heart is their natural nitrate content. And unlike synthetic nitrates added to processed meats, which can create harmful nitrosamines, plant-based nitrates are converted by your body into nitric oxide, a powerful vasodilator that helps blood vessels relax and improves overall endothelial function. Nitric oxide is like the youth serum for arteries. It keeps them flexible, responsive, and smooth. It helps prevent platelet aggregation, and it reduces blood pressure. In fact, consuming leafy greens can improve FMD measurements within hours. Beet greens, for example, contain more nitrates than beets themselves, but even basic salad greens offer benefits. You can see why populations that consume large amounts of leafy greens, like the traditional Mediterranean regions or plant-centered rural Asian communities, tend to have lower rates of cardiovascular disease. Large observational trials, such as the EPIC cohort, highlight a strong association with higher vegetable intake, especially greens, and lower cardiovascular mortality. And while observational studies can't prove causation, the consistency across trials, cultures, and mechanisms paints a compelling picture. But as extraordinary as greens are, let's move to a category of foods that repeatedly demonstrate some of the strongest cardioprotective effects documented: whole grains. Specifically, intact whole grains, not refined flour, not whole grain bread where the grain structure has been pulverized, but intact grains like oats, barley, quinoa, farro, brown rice, buckwheat, and millet. Oats and barley in particular have a special kind of soluble fiber called beta-glucan. Beta-glucan forms a viscous gel in the digestive tract that binds to cholesterol-rich bile acids, helping flush them out of the body. The liver then has to pull more cholesterol from the bloodstream to produce new bile acids, lowering LDL levels. But LDL lowering is just one aspect. These intact grains also help improve insulin sensitivity, reduce inflammation, and support a healthier gut microbiome, all of which contribute to heart health. People who consume the most whole grains consistently have the lowest rates of heart disease across major cohort studies, and randomized trials show that replacing refined grains with intact whole grains improves cardiovascular biomarkers in as little as 12 weeks. In fact, even a single serving of oats a day can produce a measurable LDL reduction over time. But grains aren't the only fiber-rich heroes here. Legumes, beans, lentils, peas, and chickpeas are among the top foods associated with cardioprotection worldwide. If you want to see populations with some of the lowest heart disease rates, look for cultures that treat beans as a dietary staple. And again, randomized trials show why. Legumes can lower LDL cholesterol, reduce blood pressure, and improve overall glycemic control. Black beans, kidney beans, pinto beans, edamame, lentils, they're all high in fiber, plant protein, potassium, and phytonutrients. And thanks to their low glycemic load, they stabilize blood sugar, which helps support endothelial function. A fascinating meta-analysis found that people who eat beans 4 times a week have a significantly lower risk of coronary heart disease. And remember, these aren't exotic foods. These are some of the most inexpensive, accessible, widely available staples on Earth, but they pack a punch. Nuts and seeds also stand out in the cardiovascular literature. Almonds, walnuts, pistachios, flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, they're rich in healthy fats, fiber, minerals, and antioxidants. Walnuts, in particular, are the only nut that's a significant source of plant-based omega-3s.
Flax seeds contain lignans, compounds that may help reduce inflammation and improve lipid profiles. A handful of nuts a day has been associated with lower rates of heart disease in cohort after cohort, and clinical trials back this up. Nuts can lower LDL cholesterol, improve arterial function, and reduce overall cardiovascular risk factors. In the famous Predimed trial, people assigned to a Mediterranean-style diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil or nuts saw dramatic reductions in major cardiovascular events compared to a control group. Now, while that trial had its methodological controversies, the overall body of evidence still strongly supports nuts and seeds as a powerful component of a heart-healthy dietary pattern. Now, speaking of omega-3s, let's talk about plant-based omega-3 sources. While fish is often touted as a heart-healthy option due to its EPA and DHA content, the data is mixed. Some trials show benefit, others don't, and some of the largest meta-analyses suggest that fish consumption may not be as cardioprotective as once believed, especially when compared to plant-based sources of omega-3s, which come packaged with fiber, antioxidants, and zero cholesterol. Flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, and walnuts contain ALA, the essential omega-3 that the body can convert, albeit inefficiently, into EPA and DHA. But interestingly, people who consume higher amounts of plant-based omega-3s tend to have lower rates of fatal coronary heart disease. It's not just the omega-3s themselves, it's the whole food matrix. And then there are foods that improve cardiovascular health not by lowering cholesterol, but by reducing inflammation, because chronic inflammation is one of the key drivers of heart disease progression. And here's where spices like turmeric, ginger, and garlic play an interesting role. Turmeric contains curcumin, a potent anti-inflammatory compound that has been shown to reduce CRP levels, improve endothelial function, and decrease oxidative stress. Garlic has been studied extensively for its ability to reduce blood pressure and improve lipid profiles. Ginger has been shown to help lower LDL cholesterol and triglycerides. But spices aren't the only inflammation fighters. Cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts contain sulfur-rich compounds called glucosinolates, which may help reduce oxidative stress and inflammation. Population studies consistently show that people who consume more cruciferous vegetables have lower rates of cardiovascular mortality. And then there's one of the most studied beverages in cardiovascular science, green tea. Rich in catechins, particularly EGCG, green tea has been shown to improve cholesterol levels, reduce inflammation, and support endothelial health. But you don't need fancy matcha ceremonies. Just a simple cup of green tea can help support cardiovascular function. One food group that may surprise people with its heart protective power is mushrooms. Studies show that people who consume mushrooms regularly have lower levels of inflammation and improved cholesterol profiles. Mushrooms also contain beta-glucans and other polysaccharides that support immune function and vascular health. And some varieties, such as shiitake mushrooms, contain aritidainin, a compound known to help lower cholesterol. Another fascinating area of research is the gut-heart axis. The trillions of bacteria in your gut produce compounds that can either support or harm cardiovascular health. For example, when certain gut bacteria metabolize carnitine from red meat or choline from eggs, they produce TMAO, or trimethylene amine oxide, a compound strongly associated with an increased risk of heart disease. In fact, multiple studies show that high levels of TMAO are predictive of heart attack, stroke, and death. But plant-based diets produce virtually no TMAO, even when participants are fed carnitine. Why? Because their gut bacteria simply aren't equipped to produce it. This highlights how diet changes not just what you eat, but who you are feeding inside your body.
Probiotic-rich foods like fermented vegetables, kimchi, sauerkraut, plant-based yogurts, and miso may help support a healthier gut microbiome.
and therefore a healthier heart. Prebiotic fibers found in foods like onions, garlic, bananas, leeks, asparagus, and whole grains feed beneficial bacteria and help reduce inflammation, improving cardiovascular biomarkers. Now, before we talk about the single most evidence-supported dietary pattern for heart health, let's address what might be the most important finding in the history of cardiovascular disease research: the fact that heart disease doesn't just stop, it doesn't just slow down, it can actually reverse. And the only dietary pattern ever shown to reverse advanced atherosclerosis in randomized controlled trials is a whole food, plant-based diet low in animal products and low in processed foods. Dr. Dean Ornish demonstrated this in the 1990s under incredibly rigorous conditions. Angiograms, the gold standard imaging test for viewing coronary artery blockages, showed actual regression of plaque in the plant-based group. That's not supposed to happen. Conventional medicine often frames heart disease as a one-way street, but this study showed that if you dramatically change your diet, if you eat whole plant foods that reduce inflammation, improve endothelial function, lower LDL cholesterol, and nourish the gut, you can literally open up arteries clogged with plaque. And this wasn't a fluke. Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn showed similar results in his patients, many of whom had such advanced heart disease that they had already undergone multiple procedures. These findings are so groundbreaking that they should have changed the entire practice of cardiology, and yet many people still don't know this is even possible. But the science is clear. Diet can be more powerful than medication, not instead of medication, but often beyond what medications alone can achieve. Statins can slow the progression of plaque, but diet can actually reverse it. So what foods show up again and again in those reversal diets? Beans, greens, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, herbs, spices, and foods as close to their natural state as possible. In other words, the foods your great-great-great-grandparents would actually recognize as food. But let's zoom in even closer and talk about some superstar foods for heart health, foods so consistently beneficial across trials that they deserve special mention. First, flax seeds. Just 1 tablespoon of ground flax seeds a day can significantly reduce blood pressure. And we're not talking about tiny reductions. We're talking reductions comparable to some medications. Flax seeds also help lower LDL cholesterol, reduce inflammation, and support healthy blood vessels. They're a triple threat: fiber, omega-3s, and lignans, all working together. Second, beans, especially lentils. Lentils have one of the lowest glycemic indices of any whole food. They help regulate blood sugar, reduce LDL, and improve endothelial function. One study found that replacing half of someone's dietary animal protein with plant-based protein like beans lowered blood pressure, LDL cholesterol, and overall cardiovascular risk factors. Third, leafy greens, especially arugula, kale, and spinach. Studies show that consuming just 1 cup of greens per day is associated with a significantly lower risk of heart disease. And again, thanks to their nitrate content, they support nitric oxide production and help keep arteries flexible. Fourth, berries, especially blueberries. Participants in multiple trials experienced improved blood flow, lower blood pressure, and reduced cardiovascular risk markers simply from eating blueberries daily. Fifth, walnuts. Walnuts contain the highest concentration of alpha-linolenic acid of all nuts and have been shown in randomized controlled trials to improve endothelial function and reduce inflammation. Just a handful a day can make a measurable difference. Sixth, oats and barley. Thanks to their beta-glucan content, they help reduce LDL cholesterol and support a healthy gut. Seventh, cruciferous vegetables. These provide sulforaphane and other compounds that help reduce inflammation and improve arterial health. Eighth, extra virgin olive oil in moderation. While whole food fats like nuts and seeds are generally preferred, extra virgin olive oil, when minimally processed and rich in polyphenols, may provide benefits for endothelial function. Ninth, green tea. Its catechin content has been shown to improve cholesterol levels and support arterial health. 10th, spices like turmeric and garlic. These help reduce inflammation and lower blood pressure. Now, one of the most fascinating findings in the literature is how quickly the body responds to dietary changes. Within hours of eating a high-fat meal, especially one high in saturated fat, endothelial function drops, blood becomes more viscous, inflammation rises, free radicals spike. We can actually visualize white blood cells sticking to the arterial walls under a microscope after certain meals. But when you eat whole plant foods, the opposite happens. Blood flow improves, inflammation drops, antioxidant levels rise. It's as if every meal is either contributing to arterial healing or contributing to arterial injury. And let's not forget one of the simplest yet most powerful interventions, reducing dietary sodium. High sodium intake is strongly associated with elevated blood pressure, which is one of the strongest risk factors for heart disease. Replacing sodium with potassium-rich foods like fruits, vegetables, and legumes helps relax blood vessels and reduce hypertension.
Speaking of potassium, bananas, potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans, and leafy greens are among the best sources, and studies consistently show that diets high in potassium and low in sodium are associated with lower risk of stroke and heart disease. Now, beyond specific foods, let's look at the big picture dietary patterns most strongly associated with cardiovascular protection. Whole food, plant-based patterns consistently show the lowest cardiovascular risk across large cohorts like Adventist Health Study 2, EPIC, and the Nurses' Health Study. People who follow plant-centered diets have lower levels of inflammation, lower LDL cholesterol, better blood pressure profiles, healthier gut microbiomes, and dramatically lower rates of heart disease. The Mediterranean diet also shows cardiovascular benefits, especially when centered around whole plant foods, legumes, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and nuts. But many Mediterranean-style diets as practiced today include refined grains, processed foods, and significant amounts of animal products. The benefits seen in the research are largely due to the plant-based components, fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, olive oil, and fish, not red meat, butter, or cheese. So where does cholesterol fit into all of this? LDL cholesterol is one of the most well-established risk factors for cardiovascular disease. The lower your LDL, the lower your risk, and diet is one of the most powerful ways to lower LDL levels. Saturated fats, found primarily in meat, dairy, and processed foods, raise LDL cholesterol. Trans fats are even worse. Dietary cholesterol also plays a role, especially in individuals who are hyper-responders. On the flip side, fiber, especially soluble fiber, helps lower LDL. Whole plant foods contain zero cholesterol, and they're naturally low in saturated fats. This is why people who adopt plant-based diets often experience significant reductions in LDL levels, sometimes upwards of 30%. But cholesterol isn't the only factor. Oxidative stress, inflammation, endothelial dysfunction, and insulin resistance all play major roles. And again, whole plant foods address all of these. This is why heart-healthy diets aren't just about lowering cholesterol, they're about nourishing the entire vascular system. Let's talk about inflammation for a moment. Chronic inflammation is like smoldering embers slowly damaging the vascular walls. C-reactive protein, or CRP, is a major marker of inflammation, and plant-based diets consistently lower CRP levels. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and legumes are full of antioxidants that help neutralize free radicals. In contrast, processed foods, fried foods, and animal products tend to increase inflammation. Another factor is blood pressure. Hypertension is one of the strongest predictors of heart disease, and diet can dramatically influence it.
The DASH diet, rich in fruits, vegetables, and low-fat dairy, was originally designed to reduce blood pressure. But when you compare DASH to a whole food plant-based diet that eliminates animal products altogether, the plant-based patterns tend to produce even greater reductions in blood pressure. Then there's insulin resistance, the silent contributor to cardiovascular disease. High insulin levels promote inflammation, increase LDL oxidation, and damage the vascular system. Whole plant foods help stabilize blood sugar, reduce insulin resistance, and support metabolic health. Refined carbs, sugary beverages, and high-fat animal products do the opposite. Now let's talk about something truly fascinating: antioxidants. These aren't just buzzwords. Antioxidants help neutralize free radicals that contribute to oxidative stress and arterial damage. Fruits and vegetables are packed with thousands of antioxidant compounds, including polyphenols, carotenoids, and flavonoids, that work synergistically to protect the heart. No supplement can replicate the complexity or effectiveness of whole food antioxidants. In fact, randomized trials show that antioxidant supplements often fail to provide the same benefits as whole foods, and in some cases may even be harmful. But berries, greens, whole grains, nuts, and beans consistently demonstrate antioxidant benefits in clinical studies. One of the most powerful pieces of evidence for the benefits of whole plant foods comes from the blue zones, regions around the world where people live exceptionally long, healthy lives. In all 5 blue zones, Okinawa, Sardinia, Nicoya, Ikaria, and among the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, people eat diets centered around whole plant foods. Beans are always a staple. Meat is consumed rarely, if at all. And guess what? Heart disease is rare too. The Adventist Health Study, for example, found that plant-based eaters had significantly lower rates of heart disease, even when controlling for lifestyle factors like smoking and exercise. This tells us that diet itself plays an enormous role. Let's explore why fiber is so essential for heart health. Fiber helps lower cholesterol, stabilize blood sugar, and feed beneficial gut bacteria. But most people do not get enough fiber. In fact, the average person consumes about 15 grams a day, less than half of the recommended amount. Whole plant foods, fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grains are the only natural sources of fiber. Animal products contain 0 fiber. 0. This means that the more plant foods you eat, the more fiber you consume, and the more your gut and cardiovascular system benefit. Fiber also helps sweep excess cholesterol out of the body and support a healthy gut microbiome, which, as we discussed earlier, profoundly influences cardiovascular health. We can't talk about heart health without addressing processed foods. Ultra-processed foods, high in sugar, salt, and unhealthy fats, contribute to inflammation, insulin resistance, weight gain, and endothelial dysfunction. Studies show that the more ultra-processed foods people consume, the higher their risk of cardiovascular disease. And it's not just the additives, it's the structural changes in the food itself. Processing strips foods of fiber, antioxidants, and nutrients, leaving behind calorie-dense, nutrient-poor products. Now let's bring everything together by looking at what a day of heart-healthy eating could look like, not as a diet, not as a restriction, but as a celebration of foods proven to nourish the heart. Imagine starting your morning with a bowl of steel-cut oats topped with blueberries, ground flax seeds, and walnuts. That's beta-glucan, antioxidants, omega-3s, fiber, and heart-healthy phytochemicals all in one bowl. Maybe sip a cup of green tea on the side. For lunch, picture a lentil and quinoa salad loaded with spinach, cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, red onions, and a lemon tahini dressing. That's plant protein, fiber, nitrates, vitamin C, potassium, and anti-inflammatory compounds. And for dinner, envision a hearty bean and vegetable stew with kale, carrots, celery, mushrooms, tomatoes, garlic, and turmeric, served over barley or brown rice. Anti-inflammatory spices, cruciferous vegetables, legumes, and whole grains working together to support your cardiovascular system. And throughout the day, enjoy snacks like apples, oranges, carrots, hummus, chia pudding, or a handful of nuts. This isn't theoretical. It's exactly the kind of eating pattern shown in the research to improve blood pressure, reduce LDL cholesterol, support endothelial function, and even reverse cardiovascular disease. Think about it. Your heart beats about 100,000 times a day. Over the course of a lifetime, that's more than 3 billion beats, and every one of those beats depends on the health of your vascular system. The foods we choose, every meal, every snack, help determine how smoothly those beats continue. Your heart isn't asking for perfection. It doesn't need fancy superfood powders or expensive supplements. It just needs whole plant-based foods, foods rich in fiber, antioxidants, nitrates, and phytonutrients to help it do what it was designed to do, keep you alive, healthy, and thriving. So if you want to support a healthy heart, level up your cardiovascular health, or reduce your risk of heart disease, the evidence points overwhelmingly in one direction. Pile your plate with whole plant foods. Load up on greens, berries, beans, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and fruits and vegetables. Set aside the processed foods, minimize the saturated fats, and let every meal be an opportunity to nourish and protect the most important muscle in your body. Your heart is listening to what you eat. Every beat depends on it. If you found this helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the next video to keep learning how to use the power of nutrition to transform your health. Your journey to a healthier heart starts today, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.